intro thing, isn't it?
Brave intro.
I remember Bill Bailey's version of it. That was pretty awesome.
Oh, that was excellent. Right.
Johnny, has Richard been on? Richard Webfleet to do a little test.
Well done, Paul. You just talked right over the final 3 seconds.
Yeah.
Well done. Great job.
So good afternoon, good morning and good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome back to the EV Cafe, the first one of 2021. We have all very much missed you. So back in, what are you wearing, John? Nice beard there, Sam. But back in 2020, our members networked, found like minds, done business together, and crucially put more electric vehicles on the road, and not just in the UK either. We had members from around the world finding common ground and sharing knowledge. We have someone from Cape Town saying hello this morning. And of course, heaps of banter and nonsense thrown in. And so in 2021, it will be no different, just with an added shot of espresso, because we are planning on building the cafe bigger and better, crucially giving us new and innovative ways to continue bringing the global EV community together. In order to discuss the future of mobility, of course, such as our first live physical event, which is planned for the ITT Hub in June, subject to COVID-19. This will give us all more opportunities to form valuable partnerships, explore the next generation of innovation, learn from case studies and insights from industry leaders, champion innovative ideas and share knowledge, and of course much more. So in the meantime, it's business as normal for us, and we will continue with monthly gatherings at the cafe. And as many of you know, in between sessions we carry on the conversations via our LinkedIn page, our group and other social media channels. That moustache really suits you, Sam.
Moving around.
In the meantime, if you need impartial and agnostic advice from across the whole e-mobility value chain, then you can reach out to any of us via the following email address, hello@evcafe.org. If one of you can put that in the chat box, that'd be great. Whatever it is, we are all here for you. But now it's time to announce what's on for the Real World Winter Operations Cafe menu for today. And in order of appearance, we have Mr. Richard Parker, who will kick things off and share the magic of telematics, breaking down the data behind the journeys, especially during winter, followed by Kevin Booker, who will be live from the Brecon Beacon National Park, bringing us the end user, fleet manager and rural example. Then on to Dr. Euan McTurk, who will be taking us through the science behind the battery and charging in different weather patterns. Then finally, James Rooney from British Gas, who will delve into winter conditions by managing the electric vehicles themselves, in insight into maintenance, real-world accounts of any accidents or charging issues. Presentations will be 5 minutes each, and they'll all be over within 90 minutes of the show, like football, but just more entertaining. But we will still be live for a further 30 minutes afterwards to continue talking to you. So it'd be nice if you stayed for the whole duration, but don't feel like you need to, you have to. But before we do anything else, we must go through the digital housekeeping for this session, especially for the newbies of the CAF. So as the agenda, as I just mentioned it, each of the special guests will have that 5 minutes to present, and then we will go to the mailroom for questions and to talk to you, approximately 15 minutes each presentation. Please use the Q&A tab to ask questions. There's no such thing as a silly one. Feel free to use a chat box throughout the session also to talk to us and the rest of the audience, but ignore it if it becomes too distracting, especially during the presentations. We always want to hear from you, so a quick hello and where you are from would be really appreciated. And the more questions, the better in the Q&A tab, because it keeps us nice and busy. The last rule is just for the special guests and anyone joining the panel. If you want to speak, then please raise your hand on camera. This is just to avoid crossing over each other, because there's going to be a lot of us on screen. So that's enough of the housekeeping. So let's get on with the show. And so we shall begin with introductions and talking to the sofa panelists, otherwise known as the presenters. First up, I'd like to introduce John Curtis, who is the mail boy of the show as well.
Hello everybody, happy new year and all that stuff. First one of the year and first gob of this year, and I just love you all. We have a number of brilliant speakers today. one of the really key things that I'm looking forward to is to learning some stuff about the real world, because we all talk because we love EVs, blah, 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 blah. But actually it's about what it's like out on the road. And as a Go Ultra Low ambassador, that's part of what I do all day, every day, is talk EV to people. So listen up, pin back your goals, and make sure plenty of questions in the Q&A session, in the Q&A box. Otherwise, I'm going to have to make some up. Thank you.
Next is Sarah, who is a chat box mistress, ensuring your voice is heard. Although please keep the questions in the Q&A tab of the show.
Yeah, what he said. Basically, I'm going to be policing the Q&A box today, but for those who don't know me, I'm Sarah Sloman. I work in zero emission mobility, and I'm here to continue that message of all mobility options being extra important, and moving away from internal combustion engines for fleet is key. So I'm very excited. It's the first proper one of all of us together for 2021. So get involved, say where you're from. Don't forget to include all panelists and attendees in the chat box, because some of your messages is only going to be for us, the panelists. So here to help. Really cold. Wish I brought my flask. I've already run out of tea, so I'm going to sit back and listen to everyone talking.
Thank you, Sarah. Next is hashtag Van Geek, Paul Kirby.
Well, imagine my excitement. This is made for vans with the people that we've got on today, with James Rooney, of course, of Centrica, and Kevin Booker of the Brecon Beacons fleet. So, you know, with 4.1 million vans on the road, it is really important that we answer questions for van users. They're 16% of the traffic, but 30% of the emissions in cities. Wow. So if we can make a difference there, we can really make a difference. And something that is something we've been considering as a group is, you know, why are we doing this? What is all of this about? And it's about the air quality, and it's about making a difference that will affect people for the future. So, and another thing that makes a difference for people and in the future is, of course, mental health. And we do celebrate good mental health, and we have an open door policy here at the EV Cafe, and will always be open to talk about all things mental health and encourage and support one another where that is concerned. So I'm really looking forward to today's session, and I'm wrapped up warm for it, probably too warm.
Paul, you're also going to be acronym police, aren't you? And make sure that we're not talking too technical and that we understand what's being said in the show.
So no SWALK or Holland or none of that sort of thing.
Yeah. And also encouraging the audience to maybe come off mute and talk to us throughout the show as well.
Absolutely. There's a couple of people that I know will be joining us. There'll be a first-time guest today that I will definitely want to be inviting, who's coming on later. Yeah,
excellent. And by no means least is Sam Clark, who's a timekeeper of the show, ensuring our guests who present keep to their 5-minute time. And he's waited long enough. He started to grow a beard, by the looks of it.
Yeah, you're so long to your boring intros. No, they're not boring at all. Yeah. By the way, Paul is bright green on my screen. Is that the same for everybody else?
No.
Literally, he's just green.
Is that metaphorical?
He's the Grinch for real.
He's like too hot. Anyway, hello everybody. My name's Sam Clark. When I'm not larking about with these jokers, I'm doing a proper job, which is the Chief Vehicle Officer for GridServe. So trying to build electric forecourts and indeed lease vehicles to people and get as many EVs on the street as possible or on the road as possible. So as always, delighted to be here. We're all learning. Every day's a school day for everybody, including us. I'm really keen to understand and learn a bit more about winter driving as well. And I'm looking forward to asking lots of questions to a certain professor in the room, who I'm sure will be bombarded with techie questions, but no, not you, Sarah. You're not a professor. So yeah, really looking forward to today, and looking forward to all the questions and the speakers.
Thank you very much, team. Thank you. And then finally, my name, for those of you who don't know, is Johnny Berry, otherwise known as Balti McBaltface. Thanks to James for giving me that name, and head barista of today. So, but before we invite the first guest on stage, I have a bit of an announcement to make. As you may have seen, Renault launched this amazing new strategy last week called Renaulution. And I'll post a link to the presentation for anyone that's interested in learning more. But as part of that, I now work for a full subsidiary company of Group Renault called Electrode. And so this means that I'm not just involved in electric vehicle sales, but I can now also offer full agnostic turnkey charging solutions for fleet. So I will both. So just wanted to get it out there. But if you want to learn more, then feel free to reach out to me. If you want to learn more from any of the panelists, then feel free to reach out via LinkedIn and hello@evcafe.org. Because now it's time to introduce our first guest speaker of today, and that's Mr. Richard Parker. Mr. Richard Parker, welcome to the show. Hello. Over to you.
Over to me. Right, share this screen. Sam, don't start the clock yet.
Oh, you mean this one?
Yeah. Right, can everyone see my screen okay? Is it
Yes,
working?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, lovely. All right. Hi, everyone.
Hang on, sorry, Richard. How long are we giving speakers?
5.
5 minutes.
2, just 2.
It's 2. You want me to talk at that rate, do you?
Okay, then.
We can have the normal 5, Richard.
All right.
You're generous, Paul. Thank you.
In which case, I shall start your timer now, and I'll give you a warning when you're at 30 seconds in. Or 30 seconds out, sorry.
Okay, lovely. Okay, hi, everyone. And if it's not too late, thanks very much for the opportunity to come onto this. Happy New Year to everyone. As Johnny said, my name's Richard Park, and I work for Webfleet Solutions. Now, some of you in the call may remember us as TomTom Telematics, but in 2019, we were bought by Bridgestone, and we have been rebranded as Webfleet Solutions ever since. Okay, so enough of that. On to winter journeys. As fleet professionals, many of you in the cafe will be used to working with data and technology to manage the performance of vehicles and those driving them. For the performance of EVs for your business in winter, however, data insights become so much more important. Our analysis, and I might get put down for this by the professor later, suggests that between 10 and 0 degrees, the range of an EV can be impacted by 0 to 20%, and between 0 and -10 degrees by 20 to 40%. It's also true that best performance is achieved when outside temperatures are between 20 and 22 degrees, the same temperature we like to keep our houses, where we are less likely to use heating or air conditioning to be comfortable. I'm going to look quickly at 3 areas where data can help improve range and mitigate some of the impact of cold weather. These are the thermal condition of the vehicle, the human, journey planning, and driver behavior. Okay, so getting the most out of the next day's workload for proactive preconditioning of the vehicle. Firstly, and this is not about data, understanding if the vehicle can be kept in more temperature regulated conditions, such as a garage when not in use, will limit the amount of energy required to prepare the vehicle for the next day. But beyond that, where home depot charging is available, we know that defrosting the vehicle, preheating the occupant's seats and steering wheel, not the cabin, while still on the charger, will assist the available range for that day versus not doing so. Now, for fleet stakeholders, capability now exists to have a holistic view when the fleet is charging or not at defined times of the day. For example, all vehicles to be on charge by 9 p.m. This can be used to ensure that the EV fleet will be in the best possible state of charge for when the vehicle is required. Vehicles can also notify when connected but not charging. In extreme winter months, knowing this data can help to see that the battery temperature is being maintained for the start of the day and potentially prolonging the life of the battery by protecting it from extreme conditions. Of course, the same data can also be used when on-site charging infrastructure is limited and can be used to efficiently notify when a vehicle is charged and can be moved off the charge point to allow for more vehicles to be charged throughout the day. At Webfleet, we also believe that as we move towards 2030, potentially 40 to 60% of ELCVs in particular may not have regular access to home or depot charging. So ensuring that drivers are able to access suitable charging infrastructure ahead of the next day's requirements is key. Combining journey data with dynamic charge point information enables drivers and fleet managers to efficiently plan and navigate the working day to ensure vehicles are charged ahead of the next day's requirements. The availability of this data minimizes business and driver disruption, and perhaps even making EVs an option where they are previously discounted due to on-street charging challenges. Finally, know the distances your vehicles do and how they are driven. For years, data has been available relating to the average trip distances and vehicle operating patterns. As we learn more and more about the impact of seasonality on EV range, it's now worth looking to that same data to understand if a seasonal change in daily operating is needed. For example, When EV vehicle winter performance data is integrated into seasonally adjustable workflow management, jobs can be automatically planned to take account of this impacted range and any potential top-up charges during the day. If you have a telematics data and associated reporting, take the time to understand the daily trip dynamics for the business and ask, can the summer model be sustained through the winter if we're going to be impacted by range degradation? Or through using the available data, can early planning mitigate the business impact of this? Route optimization tools will also feed routes to drivers and will maximize an EV's winter range and prevent drivers eroding potential mileage by not taking the most efficient route. It'll also be ensuring that the top-ups, where required, are specifically planned into the routes and the journeys during the day. Finally, driving behaviors. Telematics data will provide driving performance visibility as it always has for ICE vehicles. Understanding how a trip has been undertaken and then coaching a driver on things like coasting and the behavior of the right foot to get the most from an EV will also limit the loss of range and therefore the impact on the business. I think that's probably my time. So thank you for listening, and hopefully some of that was useful.
Thank you very much, Richard. So I'm going to give it to John Curtis because we have some questions already in the Q&A tab. So over to you, John.
Bless your little heart. Right. Okay. So picking up on Keith Woodcock, he's got a question and he says he's noticed a drastic reduction in driving range rather than the 20% you were talking about. He said drastic. Is that unusual or is that standard? It just happens. It's a thing we got to live with.
I think from our perspective, if we take a bit of history, that Webfleet have really got into the EV space from September of last year, and our data is building and building as our EV fleet is building. If I'm honest, we don't have that data, and I think it's down to each. If you're using the telematics, each organisation, based on use case and the types of journeys they're doing, may have different impacts. I'm sure that the Brecon Beacons will have a different impact on range in their operation versus somebody down in the southwest during the winter months and things like that.
We will hear much more from Kevin Booker later. Yeah. So thank you for that, Richard, for that plug. Now, Paul Barnfather's asking about scheduling preheating for fleet vehicles. So you know that an electric vehicle can be preheated so that when the driver gets in, it's lovely and toasty. Is that something that can be done across a whole range of vehicles? If you've got a fleet of 20 vehicles outside your work premises, do you have to go into each individual vehicle and set up their preheating, or could you do it with a button on some software somewhere? From our perspective, we don't push data to vehicles. So part of the things with the telematics is pulling the data that the vehicle is giving us. So it's not an area of expertise, John, for me. I wouldn't know the answer to that necessarily. I would imagine that each vehicle OEM will have different protocols for getting those vehicles warmed up. Fair enough.
So I would think we would be able to say, we'll be able to tell you exactly whether the vehicles are doing that process, are connected and potentially pre-warming through the data that we receive from the vehicle. We wouldn't be sending stuff through to the vehicle for preheating. Understood. So the sort of information that you pull out from the vehicle, are you aware of the software within the vehicle being able to identify that it's cold and it's holding less charge, or is that something that you don't pull from the vehicle, that actually the software is not clever enough to know whether it's 20 degrees outside or minus 20? Yeah, at this stage, John, I'd have to say that that's not something that's in the product. But I guess one of the things that, as we said, a lot of the discussions last year, this is such a quick moving feast around requirement. And one of the things that we do as an organization is have quarterly releases into our platform for software updates. And that's very much fed by customer feedback as much as it is our own product managers developing requirements. So, if that is starting to evolve as a requirement of fleet managers, as more and more EVs penetrate the fleets, then I'm pretty sure it's the sort of stuff that we'll be looking quickly to develop the software or capability to try and do that. That's good news, because of course you're always looking at what people are asking so that you can help to shape your software and meet their needs. Yeah. We're a customer-centric organization that wants to provide insight for whatever the requirement is fleet. And as we're seeing, fleet is so dynamic at the moment. And And there's so many grey areas as well for fleets in terms of decision making that we're trying to keep up with that and be ahead of it in many cases to come out with the ideas before they've thought of them themselves.
Yeah. Now, David Watts asks a question. He says, have Webfleet compared the range figures in the different temperatures and in different duty cycles, i.e. urban, rural, motorway, against the official WLTP figures, as this would be needed from an operator's perspective? Have you done that sort of analysis?
We're in the process. It forms part of this winter summer. So when we get through to journey optimization through different seasonality, the performance of the battery. So we're currently, as our own EV fleet builds, from our customer base, feeding that data to those software developers that are way beyond my skill set, to be honest, to work those algorithms and understand exactly what the different use cases and temperatures do to affecting the performance of the vehicle.
Okay, good stuff. JB, have we got time for one more question?
Yeah, you've got a few minutes yet, John, so we can go for a couple.
Brilliant, because we've got so many questions coming in from Richard. So thank you.
Or if there are any more, John, I'm happy to have them take them offline and deal with them directly if they from off after the call.
All right, mate. Well, let's see what we can get through. David Pickles asks, will Webfleet integrate V2X predicted energy management? That would be great for future proofing in the next few years.
Right. The immediate answer is I don't know, but I do know that our engineer who is responsible for integrations is on the call. So I'm pretty sure following that question there, a conversation can be had, because one of the things that we do have at our disposal and one of our strengths is the integration capability. And we work with a number of integration partners in terms of ensuring that the right data and insight is arriving at our customers when they need it.
Cool. Okay, now a question from Duncan Howell, and I think we know the answer to this, and I'd even have a stab at it. He says he drives an Outlander plug-in hybrid, and we love every electric mile is a good mile. So he said he's noticed a distinct lowering of the complete charge mileage range over the last few weeks, from 23 in the summer to 16 presently. Excuse me. He says, is this attributable to cold weather and not battery degradation? Almost certainly, I would say it's down to the cold.
Yeah. And again, going back to some of the points in the presentation about how the vehicle is preparing itself for the day as well. So before he's actually getting in it, is it outside in the cold and is it plugged in at the point where it's looking to defrost the vehicle? We're using those techniques to actually maximize the range that's in that vehicle the moment you turn the key to move off.
Yeah. Okay. Now, Willem Bartman. Now, if I'm right, Willem's in Cape Town in South Africa, and he's asked, is your data manually downloaded or available over the air? So do you suck it out of the car using some sort of SIM card, or are you having to plug in a box?
So we are over the air, so there is no manual downloading. What Webfleet do, which is different from some other organizations, we actually have technology that connects directly to the CAN bus of the vehicle.
Right. So
we are pulling the data from the vehicle that the vehicle is providing, and not using algorithms to interpret that data.
Cool.
And therefore, that then goes up into the cloud, and everything transmitted down into our software platform, where all of that, one of those screenshots around the batteries, for example, all of that is over the air and visible to fleet managers without having any manual intervention.
And Tony Shorthouse has asked, it was a question that was in my head about proprietary software and whether OEMs, car manufacturers, block you getting the data you need from their vehicles. Do OEMs just give you all the data that you need, or are there some that you just can't get hold of?
That's almost like one of my team have asked that question. So yesterday, we actually yesterday, from the end of this month, we have launched an OEM.connect proposition for fleets. So some OEMs are working with us, the likes of PSA, BMW, Mercedes. We are getting that data, but like with a lot of these OEMs, they're very protective of the data that is theirs. Whereas when you take data based from our solution, the data is owned by the client. It's not owned by Webfleet, it's owned by the client. So actually, there is a limitation to answer the question in terms of some of the data we can get. But out of those OEMs I've mentioned, we're wholly expecting the same kind of levels of data that we get from our own our own boxes.
Cool. Okay, right. Now we've got a question here, and I have to apologize if I get the pronunciation of this name wrong. Do not be at all surprised. Bruno Batala Ekadazu. Now, if I've got that right, I'll fall over and die. It says, if cold temperatures are such a big factor in range reduction, how is it that cold countries like Sweden and Norway are leading the way in EV adoption in Europe? It's a fair question. It is a great question. Now, I understand there's an awful lot of heating of the vehicle, so they keep the vehicles indoors a great deal more and keep them warm at an ambient temperature. Have you got any insight into that, Richard?
Well, again, one of the points that we raised that's kind of really prevalent in terms of keeping the occupant warm as well, in terms of maximizing range, is a lot of people will heat the cabin. And actually, you don't need to heat the cabin. Heating the cabin takes a lot more energy than a heated seat or a heated steering wheel. And actually, as a human being, for the seat, you're getting direct heat through. You're still staying warm. Yes. So that may be one of the they're a bit more educated, if you like, perhaps in terms of how to maximize that. I would suggest that the other thing they do is that they appreciate the impact of cold weather that has on the battery, and they moderate their driving and charging practices to account for it, in the same way we talked about summer to winter. Can you still do 5 jobs in an ELCV in winter where you might have done them in summer? Do you have to moderate and account for a recharge somewhere along the line?
And that's an awful lot of driving an EV in the winter, isn't it? That you need to modify your behavior. It's about behavior change. Winter is different to summer. We know that just from driving an ICE. You don't drive in the same way. Charging and how the vehicle uses and stores that energy is different.
It's a theme from 2020 with the EV Café. A lot of it comes down to education, and doing that effectively and coaching, drivers to change the way an EV drives in a different way to an ICE. People need to be educated how to do that.
Yes, mate.
Just to highlight that, Euan's actually answered the question as well. He said EV sold in Nordic countries and Canada often have cold weather packs with features like battery pack preheaters that aren't available as options in milder climates. And I think from my point of view, it's very important whenever I'm talking to a prospect of mine that I do discuss winter times with them. Yeah. And as we know, they perform differently during colder temperatures. Dr. Euan will no doubt tell us why a bit later on. But what I like to do is I like to direct people to our website or other websites which has a real world range calculator, before, so they understand what impacts range. So numbers like the factors like outside temperature, speed, load, whether you have the heating on or AC on, what that does to the range. But one thing that can't measure is topography, of course, driving styles. But I do direct a lot of customers or prospects to that as well, which helps. If you're gonna demo a vehicle in summer and no one tells you about winter, you're gonna get a nasty shot.
And that's the whole point of doing this, isn't it, Johnny? That what we're trying to do is to talk about reality. There's lots of advocates of electric vehicles who will just say what people want to hear so that they buy one, and then they buy a lemon and they think, this isn't fit for my purpose. What we're saying is that it's not as easy as some people make out. Here's the real world. Here's what actually happens, so that you go in with your eyes wide open.
Yeah, and just one question I saw on there from Jan O'Hara. What's the difference in power consumption by heating the driver, heated seats and heated steering wheel, heating the cab? Was that answered?
Well, Richard touched on it, yeah.
I did hear it's something potentially around 3,000 watts is the difference in heating the two. There is some numbers out there, and I can certainly research it and get specifics, but it is significant impact on the drain on the battery by heating the cabin.
Yeah, I was always under the impression that most electric vehicles use 3 times the amount of energy to produce their heating in the cab, whereas heat pumps are more like for like, use the same energy than you use to heat the cab. And I think it's only a few hundred watts that's required to heat a steering wheel and heated seats. So cold weather packs, as Euan touched upon, that usually includes heated seats, heated steering wheel as an option to avoid using it. Sam?
Yeah, I don't know if anyone knows the answer to this question, but I'm always curious about air conditioning. I know we're in the winter background at the moment, but I believe my understanding is the air conditioning uses far less energy than the heater does, but they both have a material effect on range. So perhaps this one for you and later, but I'm quite curious about hot conditions as well as cold.
So the bit I understand around hot conditions, Sam, is that the point at which range starts to tail off is slightly higher. Certainly for us in our temperate climates, it's there. But when you start to use air conditioning, the line of degradation, so the steepness of the line for range actually is greater than it is at the cold side of it. So it's a higher starting point of where you'll start to lose the range, but it then falls off quicker.
Okay, thanks. That's useful.
And interestingly, we've just had in the chat box the ENV 200 12-volt seat and steering wheel is 350 watts, and the heater's as much as 3 kilowatts.
Yes, yeah. So 3,000 watts, yeah.
So yeah, and on comparison to something that does have a heating pump, like Redcar as an example, it uses 1 kilowatt. So a heating pump does matter. Heating pump is really important. Paul.
Well, it's just there's a couple of things. One point to one that Richard was talking about in terms of OEM data. Wouldn't it be great if the OEMs would release that data a bit more freely? Because I think it's been an age-old argument between all kinds of fleets and lease companies and manufacturers, say who owns the data that the vehicle produces. Is it the owner of the vehicle, which is obviously the people that have purchased it from the OEM, or is it the OEM themselves? I think there's a really strong argument for the fact that the people that have bought the vehicle are owners of the data that it produces. Discuss. And the second thing is just on winter tires, because I mean we've got a very wintry scene out here, but the reason it's so lovely is because it's so rare, and it's only at temperatures below 7 degrees where winter tires are a real benefit. And I wonder if, you know, when on balance we look at the performance of electric vehicles, they're only impacted on, you know, certainly less than a couple of months a year, massively on range. Because I think we all noticed a couple of weeks ago when it was particularly cold, a distinct drop in temperature. And I wonder if, you know, data could help us around, you know, the timing of when we run vehicles or when we need to think differently.
Excellent.
Well, again, shall I answer one of the second one anyway?
Can we pause for a second? Oh, sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry.
You sure?
Yeah, just that we're running a bit behind on time, but if you can just answer a little bit from Paul, and then we can. Yeah, sorry, Richard.
Yeah, certainly, Paul. In terms of the OEM data, you know, the success we're having with the ones I've mentioned are because we've got past all that GDPR, and we are actively entrained with the other OEMs to reach that same position, you know, and trying to work forward it. So there's activity always ongoing with that. In terms of tires, you know, Bridgestone, our parent, are doing huge amounts of work in terms of right tire materials under different driving conditions, and we expect some of that to flow through in future into our ability to support clients as well in terms of the impact on range and everything.
Yeah, great.
Okay, so we've got some questions for Dr. Euan McTurk, I think. So it's now time to welcome him onto the show. John, have you got last?
Yeah, I have, and it's really important. There's been a lot of chat in the chat box about driving with big winter jackets on, and I think it's important just to say that that can reduce the efficiency of seat belts. And so wearing massive jackets is not necessarily a good idea. I would never have thought of that, and it's certainly not something that I've come across before. So Sarah, you were saying that you think that's well said, and that perhaps
it's very well said. And if you, I don't want to talk to you, and this is a positive space, obviously, but if you ever saw, as I have done in my road safety career, videos of what happens in a crash environment, particularly with children in big jackets, you would never wear a big jacket. Essentially, without the body contact, the body will slip out of the seatbelt much faster.
That's good to know. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Right, so thanks for that, Richard Parker. That was excellent. So Dr. Euan McTurk, hello, welcome to the Café again.
Good afternoon. How are you doing?
Stage is yours.
Grand, yeah.
What a great microphone. Can I love your microphone for a second?
Good.
It's very Kylie.
Really?
Yeah.
Obviously, I can't hear myself through it just now, but I've had people on like Zoom chats say before it almost sounds like I'm recording a podcast or something. I'll need to.
It sounds like a radio show. Brilliant.
Put the link in, we'll buy one.
Excellent. Yeah. I'll need to listen back to this and see just how good it is. What?
Cross the line there if you do that.
Oh, dear.
Euan, do you want me to start your timer yet?
Oh God. Yeah. Having just found out I've got 5 minutes to do this, this will be fun.
Okay.
Right. So we're hang on a minute. I'll share my screen and then we can go for it.
While Euan's doing that, can I just give a nod to the lovely Linda Grave, who's put in a comment on the chat, which is my favourite one so far, saying, "I love having 3 different levels of hot bum." I thought that's great. Definitely, heated seats are useful. There he is.
Righty. Yeah, should be able to see me now. Yeah, we'll see the presentation anyway.
Yeah, got it.
Excellent. Okay, let's try and rattle through this in 5 minutes. This will be the frostiest episode of Plug Life Television Live we've ever had, given the topic of the day. So why is it that EVs lose range and take longer to rapid charge in winter? So first of all, a little bit about me. Obviously, we've got time constraints, so most of you know all this already, but the main change since last time is that I have now started up my own consultancy, Plug Life Consulting, working on everything to do with electric vehicles, battery storage, energy storage systems, and charging infrastructure as well. So that's been keeping me very busy as of late. So here's an older example of an EV, but this is my humble 24 kilowatt hour Nissan Leaf. And in summer, the range is about 80 miles if you drive it sensibly. And the rapid charging time from 0 to 80% is about 30 minutes. In winter, that range decreases to about 60 miles. And the 0 to 80 rapid charge, well, you can be waiting in very chilly conditions for a while for it to actually, get up to 80%. There is a noticeable difference. But why is this? What's the electrochemical reason behind this? And the key component is internal resistance. So let's have a look at a lithium ion cell at 25 degrees C, which is the sweet spot between performance and minimizing degradation. And so what you have on the left is the negative electrode with layers of carbon. That's your graphite. The little blue balls there are lithium. And then on the right-hand side, you have your positive electrode, the cathode, which is where you have the likes of NMC. So that's lithium, nickel, manganese, cobalt oxide. That's the most common of many different lithium-ion chemistries. But that's the one you'll typically find in an EV. So when you're discharging and the ions are moving from the negative electrode to the positive, the cell voltage starts off about 4.2 volts. You'll notice there's an immediate drop just a little bit, like a vertical line. Then it starts to do this kind of almost like a stretched out S shape. So it sort of plateaus a little bit in the sort of mid to high 3 volts before falling off a cliff. That's the normal pattern. But what happens at 0 degrees C? Well, we have increased viscosity of the electrolyte, which means poorer kinetics. Is more difficult for the lithium ions to travel between the two electrodes, which means that you have increased internal resistance and increased overpotential. So what is overpotential? Overpotential refers to the difference between the voltage of the cell when it's resting. So it's not been charged or discharged, it's just been sitting there for a long time, and the voltage shortly after a charge or discharge current is applied. So voltage is equal to current times internal resistance, and the same applies to overpotential. That jump is equivalent to the current multiplied by the internal resistance of the cell. So if you increase the internal resistance, you increase the overpotential, and you get a lower voltage during discharge. So if we have a look at 0 degrees C, we've got our 25 degrees C discharge line here, and this is exacerbated for effect, but you'll see that when we start to discharge, that overpotential, the voltage drops a lot lower than it did before, which means that you're following this pattern, and the discharge energy that you're getting out of it is comparatively limited because you hit your minimum voltage sooner. So that increased overpotential translates to range reduction. So what we also need to consider as well is that there's an increased charge voltage as well as a decreased discharge voltage with an increased overpotential. So that was an example for discharge, but the same applies when you're charging. The colder the temperature, the higher the internal resistance, and the higher that jump when you're starting to charge a cell. So that has implications for rapid charging. So let's have a look first of all at the cell voltage. What does that actually mean? It's the potential difference between the electrodes. Voltage is potential difference. Each of the electrodes has a potential, but these cannot be measured in isolation, because it's a potential difference. It's a black box system. You can measure the difference between the two. You cannot measure them in isolation. So what you need to do is you need to introduce a reference electrode. A quick bit of electrochemistry for you. Standard electrode potential refers to the potential of a particular metal or electrode material versus the standard hydrogen electrode. This is the standard for everything. So it's a platinum wire, 1 atmospheric pressure of hydrogen gas, 1 molar acidic solution, and 25 degrees C. So
Really
that's
sorry,
how.
30 seconds, Euan.
Oh, balls. Okay, right. So similarly, you can measure
That's the
against
first bit
lithium.
I've understood.
Similarly, if you want to measure against lithium, you see standard potential is 3.4 versus hydrogen.
Sorry, I think we'll
But
give you a couple more minutes, Euan.
Yeah, fair dues, fair dues.
Sorry.
But in the battery world, we measure, or the lithium battery world, we measure the potential of these electrodes versus lithium, which we now know the standard potential of. So typically, if you were to look at, for example, the cathode, the positive electrode, if that's 3.5 versus lithium, the anode is 0.5, the potential difference is 3 volts. That's the voltage you measure on the cell. There's no reference electrode in a commercial cell. I've done a bit of work to introduce them into commercial cells. They don't like it, but you can make it happen. So that research has allowed us to see things like this. When you are charging a cell, you'll see the gray line is the full cell voltage. That's what the battery management system in the car sees. The black line is the negative potential, the anode potential, and then the red line is the cathode, the positive electrode potential. So the gray line is the difference between the two. You've got your minimum and maximum voltage. You don't want to exceed the maximum voltage for the entire cell. When you're going to 0 degrees C, you'll see that I've tried to speed it up a little bit here, but you'll see that the anode reaches 0 volts versus lithium quicker. And that means that at that point, it no longer becomes electrochemically favorable for the lithium ions to pigeonhole themselves into the graphite, and they start forming a little branch-like growth called a dendrite, which internally short circuits the cell. So it's actually a hazard to rapid charge a cell at too cold a temperature. You need to factor in, you're trying to stop these dendrites from forming, which is why the charging power has to be reduced. The battery management system can see the full cell voltage. It cannot see these two potentials here. If it could see them, then it would be able to react to the anode hitting 0 volts and throttle back more dynamically. There are increasingly advanced algorithms that can kind of second guess this, which are coming to electric vehicles. But at the moment, if you're looking at typical electric vehicles on the market today, it has to go conservative on the rapid charging power it's allowing the battery to charge at particularly cold temperatures. As I said, there's no reference electrode in a commercial cell. Otherwise, the rapid charging situation would be a lot better because we could react to it much quicker. But as a result, charging current and therefore charging power has to be decreased at cold temperatures to prevent lithium plating, to prevent that dendrite growth. This stuff we've already discussed. What's the best ways about it? Active thermal management systems, in other words, battery heaters will take care of the minimizing of winter range and the reduction of rapid charging speeds by preheating the battery. If your car doesn't have active thermal management, then over longer journeys, the battery will naturally heat itself up anyway, so you'll start to get that range back. In terms of people at home or indeed fleet users, a good idea is to set the charge to finish shortly before you need to drive the EV, because the battery will have heated itself up a bit during the charge anyway. Also set the cabin preheater to warm the car up just before you finish driving, before you start driving, whilst it's still plugged into the mains. That saves you about 3 kilowatts of power consumption whilst you're driving the car. So obviously you're getting more range out of it because you're not having to consume that. And then the final trick, of course, is when you're rapid charging, you can stick the cabin heating on, blast that, warm up the cabin, and then try and live off of that heat until you've reached your destination or the next rapid charger. And that just gives you an extra boost off of the mains, and it means that you're not sacrificing more battery power for range. If you have seat heaters, heated steering wheels and things, they use in the range of hundreds of watts rather than thousands of watts. So it's far more efficient to run those than heat air in the car. So yeah, we all know what Plug Live Television is. You know where to find it. It's on YouTube. But as I said, I've now got my awesome new consultancy that's been keeping me very busy. I've been very pleased with the feedback on it so far. Loads of exciting projects on the go. But if you have anything to do with electric vehicles, battery tech, energy storage systems, or charging infrastructure that you're looking for some expertise in, you can find me at consulting@pluglivetelevision.co.uk. Thanks for your time.
Wow. Mind blown. Sam.
Sarah was first. Go on.
Oh, I really got in there quick, I think. Come on,
Yes,
that was
yes.
definitely good. So I'm still stuck on this. It's a bit of an admission, isn't it? I'm still stuck on these dendrites being on the anode. Is that what you said?
Yes, yeah, the
And that's
negative.
how the
Yeah.
fire happens, right? Because it connects and then bad news.
Yeah. So you've created an electrical bridge between the two electrodes. The reason that a cell doesn't self-discharge is because you have that separator in the middle, that plasticky
Yeah.
separator, which will allow lithium ions through, but will not allow electrons through. So they have to go outside the cell around the external circuit, in other words, powering a vehicle, and then back in through the other terminal. And that's where they meet the lithium ions and recombine to be lithium atoms. So yeah, as long as only lithium ions are moving inside the cell, that's fine. But dendrites, because it's made of metal and metal is conductive, if that punctures the separator and connects the two electrodes inside the cell, you get very rapid discharge, a lot of heat buildup, gassing, venting of hot gases, and potentially fire as well.
And do you
Chances
think that's
that
what was happening in the early days when lots of reports were coming out about how dangerous electric cars were? Not that I've seen it myself.
Yeah. Whether it was to do with cold temperature or not is a different matter, but it was probably manufacturing defects. And in fact, we did see manufacturing defects with other cell types previously as well, where something similar would happen, but it wasn't as flammable because these, those cells were made of aqueous material. It was an aqueous cell, so it was water-based, like deionized water with various acids or whatever in the electrolyte. So it didn't catch fire. But lithium ion, because it's organic, because it's non-aqueous and it's made of flammable materials, would catch fire in the same situation. But that said, because we've learned so much from those early days, we've managed to improve safety. We've managed to not just improve the safety of the cell's construction, but of battery management as well, to the point that it's exceedingly rare for something like that to happen. And if it does, there's so many safety systems in the car that will, one, give you plenty of warning if it is going to happen, to the point that you can actually choose when you'd like to pull over and get out of the car and maybe phone the AA. And also, two, will actually suppress, they'll actually be able to extract the heat before it gets to the point where it would combust anyway. There's some really, really clever new thermal management systems out there right now.
Well,
So,
you've been a big hit as usual. You should see the chat. It's just like, we love Euan, we love Euan.
You've got some fans there, Euan, and
awesome.
they seem to enjoy the homeschooling. I'm certainly glad we record these sessions. So I'm gonna have to watch it a few times or visit your Plug Life channel, that's for sure. Sam and then Paul.
Yeah, Euan, I've got a couple of questions and they're kind of linked. The first one you half answered in your presentation, which was around thermal warming of batteries when it's charging.
Yeah.
All the cars I've ever driven never really, apart from the Tesla that talks about preconditioning when you're charging going to a Tesla supercharger.
Yeah.
I can't think of another car that mentions anything about that. So I think what you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's always better to charge your car so that it's finishing charging as you're about to use it, because that ultimately will mean the batteries are warm and you've got longer range.
Yeah, so that's the kind of manual life hack aspect of it. So
that isn't advertised enough, I think, in terms of the way that people charge their cars. They probably just think, I'll just plug it in tonight and it'll be ready for tomorrow. But actually, that probably means it's sat there for 6 hours, potentially getting very, very cold in the winter.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
Not going to do any favors when you get in the car in the morning to drive on a long journey.
Yep. And on top of that, if you have if you've got a car that's almost empty and you need to use it at like 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, then actually by timing the charge to finish around about 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, you're actually probably on balance helping the national grid, because if you'd plugged it in at 7 o'clock at night when you got home, that's the peak time for the grid. Whereas if it's going to start charging around about midnight, then that's when demand has fallen off a cliff. That's when the likes of Octopus Go has its cheap 5 pence per kilowatt hour tariff. That's when Agile Octopus might even pay you to charge your car, because there's so much renewables on the grid and so little demand. So that's just one utility provider's example. But it ultimately works out cheaper for you, cleaner for the grid, and also gives you a nice toasty battery.
Yeah, thanks. And my second question, which is linked, and by the way, I'm not even plugging a mobile phone in at 7 o'clock in the evening right now with my Agile tariff, that's for sure.
Yep.
Is that we at the forecourt, we've had an unimaginable number of Porsche Taycans turn up, because they all want to try and check out these 350 kilowatt chargers and get as fast a charge as possible. Obviously, they're capping at 280 anyway, but that's in perfectly optimal conditions, which we're in winter, so it hasn't happened yet. But a lot of the drivers said, I've been trying to go fast and slow and put the foot down to try and get here with a warm battery. Does that actually work? Or is it, or is it so? Does that logic work in something? Because only Tesla preconditioned batteries, as far as I'm aware, before you get to
correct. Actually, just to, I'll cover the Tesla thing very quickly, because yesterday or the day before, every man and his dog was sharing the news about these super quick charging batteries, and one of them was from StoreDot, which is a new chemistry. It looks promising, looks expensive at the moment, but has the potential to get cheaper. Interesting stuff. I'll keep an eye on that, but at the same time, I need to see more info on it. The other one was talking about basically just lithium iron phosphate, which is one of the most mature chemistries out there, one of the most safe versions of lithium ion as well, but with an inbuilt heater. So bearing in mind that Tesla already do the preheat thing, there was nothing novel about that. It was a clever use of existing knowledge to make a good engineering solution to it. And absolutely more cars should do what Tesla does, which is, as you pointed out, if you put a supercharger into the sat nav, it preheats the battery to 50 degrees C because you've got lower internal resistance, and that means you can take on a higher power because you've got lower over potential, but then it immediately cools the battery down again afterwards. If you don't extract that heat afterwards, then you degrade the battery faster, particularly at a high state of charge. And in fact, in hotter climates, very hot climates, this was something that was touched upon earlier in the chat, you're particularly then at high state of charge, you are feeding degradation mechanisms, the electrolyte, that conductive or ionically conductive liquid that allows the lithium ions to traverse between the electrodes. That starts to degrade against the cathode at its high potential that we saw on the chart earlier. So particularly in hot climates.
Driving thing quickly.
Sorry.
The aggressive driving thing, just quickly.
The aggressive, yeah, sorry, my bad. At the higher the C rate, the higher the power, then the more heat will be dissipated by the cell. But in motorway driving conditions, arguably that would work. I mean, it's silly, it's dangerous, but if you were to be like constantly doing a 0 to 60 drag style thing and then just immediately slamming the regen on, not a safe way to drive, wouldn't recommend it. But typically when you're cruising on the motorway, you're using very little power. So if you were trying to heat the battery up, you would be doing harsh acceleration followed by full regen, harsh acceleration followed by full regen. Not recommended on the road.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Excellent. Paul.
So first of all, and I think I speak for, anybody of my intellectual level, can we have a batteries for dummies, please? I think it would sell really well. Because, include a sort of it's like, it's really good stuff, and it was very visual, so that was really helpful for me anyway. One of the things that you mentioned was that manufacturers are aware of this that it can be engineered out. So how long do you see a time before technology has caught up with this challenge of winter driving and loss of energy and distance through range?
I mean, the technology already exists. It's a case of manufacturers actually implementing it. Paul Kirby of Renault, but absolutely, we need to we need to be implementing. It's Johnny from Renault. My bad.
Renault know better than to do that.
Oh dear. No. Renault's solution with is always quite clever because they redirect aircon to cool it. Similarly, in colder temperatures, they could presumably, by the same logic, redirect the heater to heat the pack up a bit. And similarly, other automotive manufacturers who have air or liquid-based cooling systems, which are currently used for cooling, it would be quite easy to put in some sort of heating element within the coolant, what is currently a refrigeration unit, add some sort of heating element as well to allow preheating. And that already exists, as I said, in colder climates, like particularly Norway and Canada. There'll be cold weather packs sold, with vehicles. So all that's built in. But it'd be nice to at least have it spec'd as an option in places like the UK, where the climate tends to be quite mild, but can get particularly chilly every so often. And it's up to the consumer if they want to, to hedge their bets and, just live with the reduction in range, or if they do want to spend the extra money on the heating element to preheat the battery pack.
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of balance financially, isn't it? Do you spend the extra money on the heat pump, or do you live with that little bit difficulty? You mentioned something just a second ago, which pricked my interest, because every time I'm driving at, say, 70 miles an hour on the motorway, I find that my range tends to be less than optimum. But you mentioned there that there's not a lot of energy used at that sort of speed. And I'm thinking of vans as well, because of course vans are like basically wind resistors driving through them, basically. So
yeah, I mean, if there are some vehicles that are absolute wind knives, and they'll, you know, the coefficient of drag is so low that you know, they don't really feel headwinds and things like that. But as you say, some vehicles are inherently flying bricks, and that becomes more awkward just due to the cargo capacity of them. The difference in energy consumption between 60 and 70 miles an hour is quite considerable, but the difference in energy consumption between cruising at 70 miles an hour and doing your acceleration to get up to it is you know, quite substantial. So obviously, the slower that you're cruising, the better your energy efficiency. But yeah, with these sort of larger range of batteries that we're starting to see now, provided that the motor is reasonably efficient and reasonably well engineered, then you know, the impact on range shouldn't be too scary at 70 miles an hour.
great, thank
Excellent.
you. It's just a rumor that I was ever cruising.
Thanks for that, Euan. I think we need a EV Cafe Euan special one day. I can see a lot of questions, a lot of conversation in the chat box, but we are a little bit behind on time. So we'll go live in the mailroom with John very shortly. But don't worry, Euan fans, he will be back on for the last half an hour of the show. So, but now it's time for our next special guest. He's our first fleet manager of today, who operates a fleet in rural and winter conditions, and also welcome him back to the EV Cafe. So he's a regular. It's Kevin Booker, not Brooker, though, pronounced earlier. Sorry about that, Kevin.
It's okay. Right, I'll just try and share my screen now.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Still want to come to Brecon Beacons National Park for our
Yeah.
We're going to do a live one there, aren't we?
Yeah.
When we're allowed to, you're quite welcome.
I can't wait.
Right, just share this. Where's full screen? Oh. There we go. Hopefully everyone can see that.
Perfect. Yeah, lovely.
So here we go. Right. So I'm Kevin Booker from the Brecon Beacons National Park Authority. Just to give you a quick overview for those who don't know me, Brecon Beacons is 520 square miles. We have a fleet of 25 vehicles, 40% are electric or plug-in hybrid. We've set a target for 100% by 2025. Based in the middle of rural Wales, slightly higher altitude than South Wales, so we do have slightly lower average temperatures. What's changed in our fleet since the last time I was on? We've removed 2 further diesel ICE vehicles from our fleet. Our pool fleet will become entirely electric or plug-in hybrid from April 2021. And we're adding more plug-in hybrid 4x4 vehicles to our Warden's fleet. We'd love to go further, but unfortunately at the moment there isn't an fully electric vehicle that can do the 4-wheel drive tasks that our Wardens need. So now to go on to the winter use of EVs, and I put some questions here to see, you know, kind of, it stimulates some questions. You know, first one is, does external temperature affect range, as we've seen from the other 2 speakers? Yes, colder temperatures we've seen do result in between a 10 and 20% reduction in the range of our fleet. But the important thing to note, this is also the case with fueled vehicles, but it's less obvious because their range is much longer. You know, and do internal factors affect range? You know, combustion engine cars use the waste heat from their powertrain to heat the cabin. In an EV, this is entirely electrically powered, which can reduce range. Does defrost in the car use a lot of power compared to a fueled car? Well, this is one of the advantages of plugins. Many of them can be programmed to defrost the car before you leave, instead of using the battery powered before setting off, which can preserve some of the range. And will it take longer to charge in cold weather? Euan's answered this question. Yes, but this is, as you say, generally less noticeable on longer trips, as charging and discharging can warm the battery. So how can these winter driving effects be mitigated? These are the things we've implemented on our fleet. one of the keys is good journey planning. So make sure you plan your journey, to take into account the reduced range of your vehicle in winter. Preheat the car when possible. If you can plug in and set it to preheat, do that before you leave. Use heated seats and steering wheel where they're fitted, since these are more energy efficient than heating the air in the car. And this is another one which not many people seem to consider. If vehicles are available with a heat pump option, select it, because these are significantly more efficient than conventional heating. And if you want to see an example of one of our vehicles in use, you can look at, there's an actual fully charged video of our Renault Kangoo van supplied by Johnny that actually has the heat pump option, because we felt that was a much better option for the vehicle than going for, I believe there is a paraffin heater, but we felt that defeats the object of an electric vehicle if you then put a fueled heater in it. And that's it. Hopefully I did that in the right time.
Brilliant, Kevin.
Whoa, that was speedy.
Yeah, practice makes perfect. Hey, Kevin, been on the show before. So over to you, John. That's all I can see. There's quite a few questions building in the queue in the mailroom. So
there are, and Kevin, there's one here from Paul Cooper who asks why there are no rapid chargers in the Brecon Beacon, something we've spoken about and been working on before. How's that going?
Well, we're still trying to get rapid chargers. Unfortunately for the Brecon Beacons National Park, although we cover a large area of 520 square miles, most of this is urban uplands where you're lucky to get electricity, let alone a rapid charger. So, I mean, it's something we've been trying to campaign to get rapid chargers, but it's a difficult thing because as a small national park, there's quite a high cost to it. And obviously, as a public sector organisation, we have to be seen to be serving the community as a whole, not just specifically picking a group of EV owners. And unfortunately, sometimes the vibe for EV owners comes across that an EV ownership is currently quite a middle class thing to do, which unfortunately is not the case, but many people do get that impression. So we have to make sure we cater for all the communities.
Absolutely, and I know from the region that well, Morrison's are doing rather well at putting in their EV boxes everywhere on the Genie Point network. And also yesterday found out an innovation that I thought would interest you for the Brecon Beacons National Park, which is fed off a 32 amp wire into a battery storage equivalent, and then a rapid can be attached to the battery. So you don't need the huge grid connection, you just need a connection. But the cost, who knows what the cost will be? I'm thinking it's going to be an Innovate UK type funded project. So I'll keep you posted if we find out.
Yeah, they're all things we're looking at. We are, for our centres, they're all solar, and we're looking at battery storage. So it's part of a complete solution that we're looking at with EVs, solar, renewables, heat pump technology, and it's all, we're trying to look at the whole package, not just the EVs.
Amazing.
What's happening with EVs across Wales? I saw that there was potentially a major operator who was coming to Wales to set up the Welsh network. Is that right?
Not any information I've had, so it may be something that's going on with Welsh government, but because we're not as directly involved. And the difficult thing as well is some of these meetings, because of the COVID lockdowns, it's been much harder to get information because those meetings aren't necessarily happening, or they're happening via Teams with much smaller groups.
Yeah, well, that's why the EV Cafe works, because we're open to everyone. Now then, Jan O'Hara asked the question. It may be Jan, it may be Jan, not sure. Tyre pressure has an impact on range. How much is the impact? Have you found any evidence to that, Kevin, with the work you've done with EVs?
I mean, from our fleet, we always follow the manufacturer's guidelines for safety. So the tyre pressures are always checked and kept at the correct pressure. But from my knowledge as a Zoe driver and stuff, there has been sort of debate over what's the best tyre pressures. So some people go slightly higher, but I'd always advise sticking to the manufacturer's recommendations. So,
okay, now Albert De Monte, again, Alberto even De Monte, asks, do you think that massive incentives are necessary as they pay out in Norway and other Nordic countries? Do you think they're necessary for us to really stimulate EV growth in the UK?
It's a difficult one, that, because there have been incentives and they've slowly reduced. But as we're seeing now, as more manufacturers make EVs, there should be less of a need for that, because they should end up being the price of a conventional fuel car. Because really, the way I think of it, you've shifted the costs. So in a fuel car, you had a very expensive engine and a cheap fuel tank. All you've done now is the motor's the relatively inexpensive bit, and you've got a very expensive fuel tank. So as manufacturing increases and more people get them, the prices should normalize. So I think it's a difficult one. Do you incentivize it? But then there's got to be a point when you stop, and there's a big hard. It's like when people who early adopters had all their charging for free, and when it stopped being free, you've got a lot of people complaining because it wasn't free anymore. So it's a difficult thing. If you over incentivize, you then have a much harder journey when suddenly something stops being incentivized. So I don't think you can win.
Good question from Tony Shorthouse, and he's asking that, are you aware of kinetic power sources? They seem ideal for rural communities to gain access to rapid chargers.
Haven't heard anything on those.
Gotta be honest, neither have I. Perhaps we could get Tony on at some point to give us some more information about kinetic power sources and precisely what he means and where they're operating and serving the community well.
We get him online.
Yeah, if we can. Tony, are you there, my friend? Tony Shorthouse.
Raise your virtual hand, please, Tony, and we'll take you off mute. If you want to come online.
See, this is the bit I love, that we can just get people online and they can ask their questions. Here he comes. Tony Shorthouse in the house. Shortly.
Are you there, Tony?
I'm off mute, mate. Off mute. Get that microphone working. How do I do it? Settings. Oh God, what do I do?
Pressure's on. Everyone's talking about me.
I'm on the spot now, haven't we?
Kinetic power sources, easy. Microphones, piece of cake. Come on, mate.
Oh, he can't. He's busy.
Oh no!
A bit later on, we'll hear from Tony when he's not so busy. I think we will take a pause on this for the time being, then, John, in the mailroom, just because. Brilliant stuff as always from you, Kevin, but it's now time to hear from somebody else. We've heard from the National Park, very rural, but now it's time to hear from one of UK's biggest fleets, British Gas. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome James Rooney to the cafe. Hello, James.
Good afternoon. So I've taken my hat off. You've been wearing it diligently for the last hour and a half, and it's got on it now.
You promised full ski gear, just saying.
Yeah,
I did. I had a look in the loft, and my approach of putting the Christmas decks away this year was to open the hat and throw from a distance. So it wasn't really worth going up there to get the bits out. But I appreciate the reminder.
No worries.
Let me just share the deck. So I've got a question later on, and this is the biggest clue to the answer for that question. But no, thank you for inviting me on.
Start your timer, James. Start your timer.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I've got the graveyard shift.
Starts now.
Brilliant. I've got the graveyard shift, so you know whoever's listening. But that's what you get when you don't buy any Renaults, I suppose. Anyway.
Best ever.
Brutal.
Anyway, no, thank you for inviting me on. So anyway, so this is winter ops in real life from our experience in British Gas and Centrica fleets. So what I want to do first of all is just talk about where we've come from, where the experience we've got has been gleaned from. And a lot of that comes from our story over the last 8 years. So in 2013, we started our journey on electrification with, at the time, the largest trial in the UK, which is on the ENV200, which you can see here. And that was part of our partnership with Nissan back then. We also tried other vehicles at the time. You can see down there the lovable old Mercedes E-Cell, which is now obviously the E-Vito. But we learned a lot. So a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about is from 8 years worth of using vehicles in all conditions. So you can see we've got these lovely, slightly cheesy branding videos from Nissan here. But the point is we've got over 2 million miles worth of electric miles under our belt, most of it done in our lovable little ENV200s. And these were the old 24 kilowatt versions as well. They aren't the new 40s. Look at the range. That was a good day of range. 69 miles is a good day of range in a 24 kilowatt hour Nissan. And that did provide us a unique problem. As a fleet, our core business is mending people's home gas boilers. And obviously, as we go into the future, we're looking at heat pumps and things. But what that means is our engineers are predominantly working in winter. They're predominantly mending boilers in cold houses because they've got broken boilers. So the only time they can get warm is in their van. And the problem we have, and what we've been talking about, is the heating load, which leads me to my next slide, which shows what we had to do to solve a problem in the ENV200s. And the astute of you will notice Webasto. Now, Webasto are a very, very good company. They're doing a lot of stuff in the electric space. But in this particular instance, we had to fit diesel-fired heaters to our MV200s. And that's kind of like strapping a log-burning stove to the passenger seat of the ENV200s. It's just not the right thing to do, but it did solve a problem on very, very low-range vehicles. Cold is a huge, huge problem, and don't underestimate it. You need to do any testing on your vehicles in winter, and ideally loaded and being driven like your vehicles are expected to be driven, or worst case driving scenarios, because that then gives you a baseline of what that vehicle will achieve in the worst cases. However, 2020, things changed. I couldn't resist putting the Renault 5 in there. Hopefully that's brought me back in the good books of Renault after my opening comment. Things are moving, things are changing. Battery chemistry is changing, battery pricing is coming down, so we can afford to put bigger batteries on vehicles. The weight and energy intensity of those batteries is coming down. So the ENV200, for example, that went up to 40 kilowatt hours a couple of years ago. Most vans coming up now, go up to 75, 80 kilowatts in some cases, depending on the size of the vehicle. So things do change, and we're glad for it. So there's a bewildering amount of vans coming out now. There's some really, really good reviews of most of these vehicles. In fact, Paul, I was admiring you on the Fully Charged show the other day, going through many of these. And it's great to see, and I'm really happy they're coming to market. They bring with them bigger batteries, the liquid cooling, heat pumps and things like that, and just the efficiencies of gaining better experience. And this all helps to combat the winter range problems, because what you normally see quoted is summer range. What you can get in summer is great. What you get in winter is a different story. And I've got some examples coming up in a second. But just covering that point around heating. So on our new vehicles we've been taking, we haven't been putting diesel-fired heaters on, you'll all be glad to know. But we've had to take into account the load that the heating takes. And on the Vivaro, for example, the one we've been taking most recently, the heater goes up to 5 kilowatts. So PTC heater goes up to 5 kilowatts. Now, it doesn't modulate as the van gets warmer and warmer, but 5 kilowatts is a lump of power. And the longer you're in the van, the longer you're pulling that 5 kilowatts. So let's have a quick chat then about range. And I've only included vehicles we've got a long-term experience of, and we've done proper testing. So please excuse that this doesn't cover every single van on the market currently. This is the range in the experience of us, usually me with a great big thing of sand behind me driving around the country's roads trying to break the thing like an engineer.
30 seconds, James.
Hey, I'm 2 slides away, fine. So you can see there's a market difference. It's about a third is what we find. But it does depend on the vehicle, and it does depend on the charging capability, so how big the battery is. Also, it's just taken into account the extra pieces there. So what differences to the impact of heating makes, about 10%, but it can be up to a third, depends on how it's used. The main impact here is poor driving. The worse you drive the van, the worse it gets. And all I can say is training is everything. Train drivers with EVs. That's my biggest message I can give. Costs. This is one of the things that people wanted me to talk about. Obviously, I can't share our costs, but I can share how we got to them. And basically, don't overlook the power of reliability, because fuel might not always make it break even for you. Reliability, RFL, and those additional charges really do help top up the balance sheet for us, such as double party charging in London for diesels. Final slide, you'd be glad to know. So I want to talk about charging quickly. Charging is everything, and preheating helps to stop it all going wrong. So preheating is available in the Vivaro, it's available on the Nissan ENV200. And what this helps to do is get those extra miles. For us, as a fleet that doesn't have depots, we use the Centrica fleet system, and that manages not only our charge points, but also all the charging that our engineers do through both an app and a back office system. So it manages the charges, it manages the telematic connection to the vehicle, as well as everything in between. And it's important you get your charging right, not only to make sure the vehicle's charged and ready to go in the morning, but also to save on costs. Because if you rapid charge in the wrong places, it can be very expensive. And I'm thinking of Ionity when I say that. But hopefully, and thankfully, there are a few breakthrough rapid charging companies coming through with sensible charging prices. That is me. You'd be glad to know.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, James. You would have had more time if you bought Renaults, but I'm joking. Right, so Paul or Sarah, whoever had their hands up first.
I
It was Paul.
Ladies first, of course.
Okay, over to Sam.
No,
Fine. I'll take it. I'll take it.
No, I want to.
No, it's fine, really. James, what's the reliability blue bar largely about on EVs? As in, what is the thing that makes them unreliable in terms of your metrics?
Yeah, so it's a mixture of the cost of repair and the cost of breakdown. So for us, the ENV200s, for example, we haven't had one breakdown. So in 8 years of running them, or 7 years of running them, not one of them has ever broken down. We've run out of charge a couple of times, but we've not broken down. We haven't had a mechanical failure. And that's incredible, really, because if you compare that to the diesel MV200, it's unremarkable. Sorry, it's rather remarkable that that we've achieved that. So that saving is incredible. What we do find is there are different maintenance things. So, for example, brakes rust out before they wear out.
Yeah.
And we end up replacing drums and discs and things because they physically rusted out. But that's what fills that column.
Cool.
So just to be clear, the electric vehicle is much lower on maintenance and in terms of cost and so forth like that. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So obviously you're not only breaking down less, but the physical repairs needed, if needed, tend to be less because there's no oil, no DPF, no clutch, nothing like that.
Okay, brilliant. The question that I had was obviously you showed home charging and also public charging, and you just cited the somewhat higher cost of public charging. How do you manage that within your fleet? Because obviously, you know, I mean, we're talking significant here, like 3 times the cost to charge publicly as it is to charge, and I presume all your drivers can't charge at home. How do you manage that?
Yeah, no, it's a really good point and probably my biggest headache. Charging at home is the cheapest way to physically put energy into the vehicle, but don't underestimate the fact that you've got to put £1,000 worth of thing on the wall. And also you're relying on people's generosity to allow us to put that on the wall and park on their driveway. So we expect probably only 2,000 or 3,000 of our 10,000 to be able to charge at home. Hopefully it'll be more than that, but it might be less. And those people that charge at home might also need to public charge from time to time. So the majority of our fleet will be a publicly charged fleet. And we do have a cutoff, so a cost per kilowatt, if you like, which Sam Clark's painfully aware of, which we run to, in which if we go over that, EVs are no longer cost efficient compared to a diesel. Happily, there are, you know, and Sam's one of them, who are bringing to market rapid charging, which is of a correct price to manage that. But there are some vendors out there at the minute who are so overpriced. You put 10 quid worth of Lecky in, and you don't go anywhere near as far as you will for 10 quid worth of diesel.
Yeah, the one aforementioned.
Yeah, so sorry, Ionity, I know you do great work, but you're very expensive.
Very expensive, yeah.
We haven't got any more questions from the panel then. Shall we go to the mail room, John?
Yeah, mail room. Okay, so James, the vehicles that you use, a lot of them are stored at depots because you're saying people don't charge at home so much. What's the best level of charge to keep those vans and vehicles at overnight or over a long period of time when they're not being used?
So we actually don't have depots. All our engineers take their vans home.
Right.
But not all of them are able to charge those at home. So apologies for if I cross some wires there. We have stored vehicles though, so I'm able to comment on that. And with electric vehicles, we find that you don't want to necessarily store them at 100%, and necessarily you don't want to store them at very close to zero. The sweet spot is actually what your mobile phone, when you buy a new mobile phone, it comes with 50% charge. And that is about what you want to store a battery at, somewhere between, in reality, about 80 and 30, 40%. If you can keep it in that threshold, the degradation of long-term storage isn't quite so bad. I'm not the physicist here, right? We should have asked this question 2 people ago. But we find that storing it at that the vehicle's fine, and actually it's a very slow drop off then a percentage on the battery. The problem you've got to watch out for, and what's stung us a few times, is the 12-volt battery does its old trick of not working after a month. And that's the one you need to keep an eye on, because if your 12-volt battery doesn't work, you can't charge the main battery.
No, bang on, absolutely, every time. And when we speak to Dean Hedger at the AA, those are the faults that always cause issues. 12-volt batteries, got to keep on top of that. Jan O'Hara asks the question, what are the driving behaviors that affected range the most in your experience?
Ooh, trying to drive them like a diesel is the biggest one for us. So regen is a fantastic piece of kit, a really, really good invention. Heavy foot, just to say something right. Regen's a fantastic bit of kit. If you drive the vehicle like a diesel, so you scream up to junctions and roundabouts, and then you brake very heavily at the last minute, that doesn't allow the recuperation of the vehicle to take any benefits. You need that much longer, slower ability, or slowing down, to put that energy back into the chemical energy of the battery. And getting that across to drivers does help. But the other bit is yeah, heavy foot. If you can avoid that, acceleration isn't actually so much the problem. It's having a rapid acceleration with no regeneration, and it's having high constant top speed. We find they're the 2 biggest.
Okay, that's really, really helpful. Now, Matt Martin's asked if you'd be prepared to share your comparison slide again. Is that possible?
Yeah, is this the, I've got a couple of, is that the comparison of mileage or costs?
Costs, I would imagine.
Cost, yeah, let me just bring that one back up. I'll run through it. I'll take a few seconds to run through it.
Good man.
Somebody in the chat box has just suggested that we should all learn to drive like a chauffeur. And I think that's probably good advice.
Not bad. Smoothly does it. Can you all see that again?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
So I'll run through it and pause for breath this time. So the blue line is electric, and the orange is diesel. So you can see fuel, that's probably about a third, and it depends where you're charged. It could be a third, it might in some cases be only half or slightly less. It depends on the blend of how you're charging. If you've got, you know, cheap depot and agreed public charging rates, then you can manage that down to half to a third, and you'll need that. We're a low mileage fleet. You know, we only tend to do 9,000 to 10,000 miles a year, so we don't benefit as much on fuel as a fleet that does a lot more miles count, because with an EV, ironically, the more miles you do, the cheaper they get, because you're paying off that amount of fuel. SMR, that's about a third cheaper, but if you combine SMR and breakdowns, it's maybe half, and it's those breakdowns for us which are expensive, because we have an engineer, a skilled boiler engineer, sat at the side of the road awaiting to be picked up, and that obviously has an hourly cost for us, which we include in our breakdown cost. And usually a breakdown on an EV, because there is some there, is a flat battery, a flat tire. You know, it's the usual non-vehicle related problems, or, you know, lockout, something like that. It's usually driven by the driver rather than the vehicle.
James, comment from Lorna. Can you just give a breakdown of the initialed graph, please, in terms of what the letters mean?
SMR.
Yes, yeah, sorry,
sorry
on this, James, because I'm the acronym police. You're not allowed to use SMR, and obviously CAS, you know, ULEZ. Please do elaborate for us.
No, absolutely. Apologies. That's completely my fault. SMR is service, maintenance, and repair. So anytime it goes into a garage for a routine inspection or service, and anytime it goes into a garage for a repair. Now, repair and a breakdown is different. A breakdown is the actually stopping the vehicle during a working day. And the cost of that then repair then goes into the other line, into SMR. But apologies for that. ULEZ, CAS, that's ultra low emission zone and clean air zone. So currently there's only a small amount of those, but do watch out, they're creeping up. and the most major conurbations will have a low emission zone or a clean air zone with varying different rules. So if you're in a van in some, you might get away with it. If you're in a van in others, you won't. So do check out where you operate. Because we're countrywide, we have to look at every single one, and we have a small army which look after our clean air zones for us to make sure we've got the right technology, and we're moving those Euro 5s out, we're moving those Euro 6s out in some cases to get in electric. And then finally, RFL is road fund license tax. And obviously on EVs, we don't currently have to pay that. What I didn't include in this is in London, you can have double parking charges if you drive a diesel vehicle. And parking in London is eye-watering enough if you live there. You know, it's sometimes £6 to £7 per hour. If you then double that because you're in a diesel, and for British Gas, that's crippling because the cost of a job then goes 14 quid up. And if you're working in London and you're servicing anywhere near people's houses, that is a cost you have to add onto the job. So it's just another chunk to add in. So when you're putting together your total cost of ownership model, these are just the building blocks. On top of that, you then need to think about, well, actually, you know, what kind of leads do I need? Do I need to have the 3-pin plug and the Type 2 lead with it? Can I just get away with a Type 2? Can I save 300 quid on a 3-pin lead? You need to think about the training you need to give them and things like that, and add all those bits in. So your TCO model, which we've had previously, total cost of ownership model. Sorry, Paul, I did it again. Yeah. So yeah, whole life cost, whatever you want to call it. Make it a lot more granular than you've currently got, because at the moment you've probably got purchase price or lease cost, fuel, and then some other elements around the cost of running that vehicle. With EVs, make it much more granular, and that's how we've managed to make EVs work for us, is by adding actually every single thing that affects the vehicles, not just most of it and the stuff that's easy to.
James, is the purchase or lease price actually double, or is that just an indicative on the graph?
So we find it depends where you're buying from, whether you're talking about market or negotiated rates. I can't share what we pay for a vehicle, but EV discounts are nowhere what you get with a diesel. Even for us, it's nowhere what you get for a diesel.
We're experiencing in the broader marketplace, generally, particularly in the heavy van sector, you know, could be 3 times as much for the purchase price. Mid-size van sector is probably double, and the smaller van sector is probably an additional 50%. Rough numbers, but that would be my broad experience.
Small camp, isn't it? So
yeah, that's what I was going for there. I mean, that's based on the Evavaro list price. Effectively, you can get a diesel one for 20, 25. You can get an electric one for 40, 45. So it is approximately double. To be honest, even after discounts, for us, it works about the same. You know, the divide doesn't get any smaller. So they are still about double the price.
Yeah. James, I thought it was really interesting that you called out breakdowns, and I think it's something worth mentioning, obviously, in regard to commercial vehicle fleets, but the value of improved utilization is just, you know, it's priceless to a company like yours, but also I'm thinking, and I think smaller businesses don't have as much opportunity to do these maths. But, you know, industry average of value of a vehicle for a day is something like £700, right? You know, I don't know what your average is, and I'm sure you won't share it. But the value of a commercial vehicle to the operator is not insignificant, and regardless of, you know, whether it's up above 700 or below 700, it's significant. So the value of that reliability is, well, as you know, for everything else there's MasterCard, but it's priceless, right?
Exactly. I mean, the hourly profitability of whatever, whether it's an engineer with us or whether it's a mechanic or in another business, you know, whatever that hourly profitability is what you're losing every time you have an idle vehicle. And what we're starting to factor in now actually is with charging speed. So if we're publicly charging that vehicle, you need to charge that vehicle as quickly as possible, or be doing something useful at the same time. So for us, that could be picking up parts or organizing something or making bookings whilst you're charging. It's trying to make engineers, for us anyway, useful whilst charging. And that's why overnight charging is great, but it's only going to tackle part of the problem.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks, James. So we're going to continue, go back to John in the mailroom. Can I please invite Euan, Kevin and Richard to come back on, turn the cameras back on and come back on the show for the last 30 minutes. Before we go back to John in the mailroom, actually, Paul, do we have anyone that would like to come off mute and maybe talk to us?
Well, I do know that I would like to say hello to Lorna McAteer. So Lorna McAteer is the fleet manager for National Grid, and obviously a long-time champion of all things electric vehicles. And brace yourselves, people. This is the first time she's been on the EV Cafe.
What?
Welcome.
So I thought, you know, I mean, she's kind of EV royalty, right? So let's say hello to Lorna McAteer.
Lorna McAteer.
I hope you are now. I've given you this big bloody lead in.
Yeah. She certainly was.
I know everything James is going to say. I'll just.
She's here, she says.
Excellent.
I'd also just like to invite anyone else that would like to come off mute to talk to us during the last 30 minutes. We have actually got someone's raised their hand to come off mute. Someone we know before, Joel Teague. Joel, would you like to? And we got Ian Gordon as well. So we're gonna speak to Joel first. Hello, Joel, and welcome back to the EV Cafe.
Thanks very much. Good to be back. This has been brilliant as always, and welcome to Lorna. I was listening to a fantastic speech earlier today on another channel.
Oh,
I know, but it was good as well. Anyway, yeah, listening to James, thanks. That's really, really well-informed stuff. It's lovely to see some of the stats on the vans and so on. We're at Co-Charger. We've got a working group we're putting together specifically to add fleet support to what Co-Charger are doing. If I could get you onto that working group, that would be fantastic, because you are really clued up, James. So if you could tap us up. We're doing something over the next 3 to 6 months to be operational fairly soon. So,
thanks, Joel. Lorna's actually got a hand up, so maybe we should invite her to come on.
yeah.
Or not. So thanks for that, Joel. Appreciate that. I'm just gonna.
Have you got Lorna on?
Just welcome to the EV Cafe, Lorna. You there?
So Lorna, I hear that your previous speech was motivational.
I bet she talks about obstacles when she gets off mute.
You were there watching me. Hello, everyone.
Hi. 3 positive points for EV adoption, because it was very motivational, very encouraging. And any other hints or tips that you want to give us real quick?
So shall I just whip over to the last 4 things that I said? So the first one I said was don't panic. So despite 2030 and all the challenges and absolutely everything else is there, it's just don't panic. You can do this through your normal replacement cycles. There will be solutions on 4x4s. We might not have any viable ones today, but they will be there. So it was just a don't panic. My next one was help. Help is in the sense of ask for help and give help. So we're all on this journey in a very different stages, and don't be frightened to ask. I got asked a question on there. I didn't actually know what the question meant, so I had to ask them what it meant before I could even answer it. So the other one was step forward. So going back to what Sam said about obstacles, I likened everything at the moment on net zero to all of us being in an obstacle race. It isn't a sprint for those that are trying to get there first, and it's not a marathon. It's an obstacle race, and we're all in it together, and we only win when we all cross that line.
Love
and that first marker is the 2030. So it was just step forward, take a step, be brave, go for it. And then the final thing I said was celebrate. When you take that step, doesn't matter where you are. Life is tough enough as it is at the moment with COVID, pandemic, Brexit, Christ knows what else you want to throw at the fleet industry. It's just celebrate the little wins every time you make that step. Even if all you've managed to do is get your HR director to say, yes, we'll review the car policy. Celebrate it.
Can I just ask, have we got an EV Cafe song coming on? Celebrate good times, come on, do. We're gonna celebrate. Yay!
So that's why we invited on Lorna, just to give her a quick update. Lorna, thank you so much. We're very grateful.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Lorna.
To welcome you back another day, properly.
I think we'll welcome you back as a special guest another day, won't we?
That would be wonderful. Yeah.
Thanks, Lorna.
Not to sing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. So, John, over to you. I can see number 20 on the Q&A chat box. So keep you busy for the next.
Oh, man. Right, we'll start with James Rooney. Joel Teague, who's already been on, asked a question about attitude, drivers' attitude. And do you find that van drivers are welcoming of electric vans, or are they a bit sniffy and not sure?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It depends on the person, but yeah, we get both. You get the advocates and you get the haters. Funny enough, most of the petrol heads are the ones who want them. The ones who really like vehicles, really interested, might have a tasty car at home. They just want tech and they wanted to go and they've researched and they know about them. And then in the middle ground, the people who are accepting of them, don't really understand them, just want to do their bit. And at the tail end of that, and thankfully, if we're going by the rule of thirds, a third of petrol heads, a third of, it's becoming more than a third of the majority of people in the middle who want to do the right thing, there's then a few at the end who are actively against it. And that could be for any reason. One, they can't be parted with petrol and diesel, or it could be because actually they just see it as too much faff. They see it as the wrong thing for the environment with misinformation, fake news, you know, and anything in between. We will come to a point where we've got to address the people who don't want to have an EV, but we're not there yet, thankfully. And hopefully, as we see the transition vehicles come through, take Lorna's point of, yeah, don't panic, there's time. As they start to see the transition happening, they will get on board. They'll naturally become accustomed to it. Yeah, we do see that a little bit.
Cheers, James. Let's go to Richard Parker and then Kevin Booker.
James, question for you. Did you kind of bring people on board through the demo program, sort of use before you and that way to motivate them? Because certainly I've done that in the past in my fleet roles in the past. And actually, you know, the percentage increase of people willing to take an EV was dramatic once they actually got in and driven one.
Yeah, we try to. I mean, we've got just under 12,000 vehicles on the fleet, so it's quite difficult to do that for everyone. So what we tend to do is bite off influencers within our fleet. So those will be people who are big on Yammer, which is like our internal Facebook, if you like, or we'll have working groups and bring it up there. I make a lot of videos, which thankfully don't get posted publicly. They're internal, just showing them around the new technology. So they're not quite up to the spec that Johnny does it, but they get the point across. But yeah, we do find it's word of mouth. You give one engineer one, all of his mates suddenly one.
Kevin, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, just to kind of reiterate the points that I think getting people to drive them is the big thing. So some of the people who really hate them drive one and they think, oh, this is actually quite good. We've had more of our staff look at getting their own electric vehicles when we introduced electric vehicles as the only option on our pool fleet. And we're seeing a similar thing with wardens, because I mean, we're an environmental organisation, and unfortunately with all the emissions tech on some of the new diesel engines, some of our vehicles do 23 to the gallon, and the wardens know we're an environmental organisation, and it's not really the best message to be putting across. So we've had more of them want to switch to, it's not ideal because they're plug-in hybrids, but as you say, you know, they are doing electric miles on them, and when the full electric pickups come, we'll go to those. But yeah, just getting people out into them makes the difference, I think.
Paul.
To shout out to Kent County Council and Leeds City Council that have two schemes funded by Highways England with 50 vans on each of them for small local businesses, which is, you know, it's an important area that often gets overlooked. The OEMs want to give the likes of Centrica, National Grid and the like, you know, a van for a period of time to test. Not everybody gets that opportunity. And I think what Leeds City Council have done and what Kent County Council have done, and my own company, Vanarama, have put on a couple of vehicles as well to allow people to try them for free for a period of time. And I think that's really good. It makes a difference and allows people to make an informed decision, like Kevin's just mentioned there.
Coventry are doing it as well, Paul.
Okay, great.
James, another question for you, which is around the volume of battery electric vans that are coming onto the market. When a new model is launched, it seems that large utilities suck up all of the vans that come onto the marketplace, and they just go, oh yeah, we want 10,000 of those, thanks very much. Are there sufficient vans for commercial fleets to really make the switch by the timescales that we're looking at?
Yeah, and I think, I don't think we fell out, but I know, Paul, you were quite vocal about that as well.
Ask this question, I promise.
But no, I appreciate we probably come across as the big bad fleet that ask the OEMs to give us lots of vehicles and we don't want to pay a lot for them. But the reality is we have a huge fleet, and actually by ordering 1,000 vehicles we've only done 8%, 9% of our fleet. So we need and we've committed to the EV100 project. So by 2030 we have to have all of our vehicles by EV. Now, in layman's, that's 1,000 vans a year between now and 2030 to be able to complete that. So yeah, we will need 1,000 vans a year. But happily, to answer the question more, I see the vehicles coming on increasing in amounts, and it's not vehicles so much, it's batteries. If you asked Vauxhall to make you 10,000 Vivaros in diesel, they'll probably deliver them tomorrow. The problem's batteries, and that is increasing.
Indeed. Paul?
We'll just say that, so, I have been vocal about big fleets taking lots of vehicles, but big fleets put them into drivers, right? So drivers don't own the company, and they're getting an experience, and their husbands and their wives, are jumping in them. One of the things I find is every time I get a different vehicle, I tend to try and not do it. I give the keys to my wife, and she goes out and drives it, and comes back and tells me all the good and the bad and the indifferent. And that to me is the way, in some ways, that we can celebrate, to Lorna's point, celebrate the fact that Centrica have bought 1,000 and BT are going to buy 250, and lots of other fleets, because it's getting the overall message out. We don't win till we all get over the line. I love that from Lorna. Thank you. And I think ultimately what James and Centrica are doing gets everybody over the line eventually, which is good.
Agreed, Paul. Dr. Euan McTurk, come back with your silky voice, my dear chap, because we got two for you. One talks about graphene. There's a question from Tony Shorthouse asking about graphene and whether that would help with cold climates. And also there's a further question about solid state batteries and their impact on and whether they'll be just able to charge better. What's the view?
So yeah, graphene is something that does get bandied about quite a bit in terms of commercially available cells that use exclusively graphene negative electrodes. Those are not available at the moment. But in theory, I mean, would it affect? I suppose it would actually improve weather performance to an extent, because you would have less of a delay in comparison to graphite of those lithium ions pigeonholing themselves in between the layers. With graphene, it's a different way of doing it. You've just got your single layer of carbon like that. And the way that would be utilized, in theory, there should be faster kinetics within the electrode for the lithium ions. So I would expect to see a bit of improvement on weather performance. But that said, the electrolyte itself would still have viscosity issues. That's where solid state gets interesting, because although there are multiple forms of solid state cell that are under development at the moment, the general consensus is that commercially available ones should be a lot more tolerant of temperature. They'll actually be able to run down to like minus 40 degrees C with some of these variants that we're looking at, with pretty high C rates, pretty high currents being drawn from them or charged to them. Having said that, the first example I'm aware of a commercially available automotive scale solid state cell, or sort of pseudo solid state cell, is being used in new Mercedes buses at the moment. And that's offering improved range because of the improved energy density, but it actually is sold with the caveat that the charging speed is lower than the equivalent lithium ion battery pack, which is also offered for that particular bus. And that's because you've got the trade-off between polymer-based solid state electrolytes and ceramic-based. Ceramic-based has generally has very good lithium conductivity, so that it's really fast to charge and discharge, but it's quite brittle. So obviously, if you're shaking it about in a vehicle, it might start to break up. Polymer is more flexible, but the conductivity of lithium is lower. So yeah, it's kind of a trade-off. There are some developed solid state cells that have a combination, like a hybrid ceramic polymer electrolyte, but it will be a few years yet before we start to see these being introduced en masse. We are starting to see them in the automotive sector. I would expect those Mercedes buses to have reasonable cold weather performance, but it is going to be slow charging or comparatively slow charging regardless of weather. So yeah, swings and roundabouts, but yes, it's one to keep an eye on.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate that. Paul?
I've got a question for Euan, actually, because we addressed it slightly earlier about what is the best percentage of state of charge to have your vehicle at. And I noticed from the Polestar and the Tesla that they recommend that you only ever charge to a lower amount of charge, you know, sort of 90%, 80%, depending on the manufacturers. Is there anything wrong with charging to 100%? And also, my second question is, why does DC charging degrade the battery more than AC charging?
Okay, so is it okay to charge to 100%? I actually have a video about that on Plug Life Television that explains that the battery management system in an electric vehicle has an upper and a lower state of charge buffer. So the voltage that we had on that graph earlier that I showed you in the presentation, for that was, you know, looking at the cell's maximum and minimum voltage according to the spec sheet. But in reality, in an electric vehicle, they'll block off a few millivolts at the top and a few millivolts at the bottom. And that helps to avoid some of the, or at least reduce some of the degradation reactions that take place at very high state of charge. So if it's a vehicle that's in constant use, or you know, a vehicle that is used on a daily commute, and is charged every day because it has to be, for example, my 24 kilowatt hour Leaf, which would do a 50-mile round trip, I would charge to 100%, have the charging kind of timed to just about finish before I needed to start driving it. So it wasn't staying at 100% for very long. And then I would drive it down to 40% and plug it back in again. But we've seen that people who leave the car at 100% state of charge for a prolonged period of time, weeks or months, that does start to cause degradation. And it also causes degradation if you shallow cycle them. So don't discharge them below 80% before charging them back up to 100, you know, the quick trip to the shops and back, and force feed them. 30 kilowatt hour Nissan Leaf batteries are particularly badly affected by that, which is why they've started to fall off a cliff in comparison to 24 kilowatt hour batteries, which will do on average about 50% more miles before they've lost, you know, they're considered end of life due to capacity loss. So that was a very expensive lesson for Nissan. They should have adjusted the upper state of charge buffer so it was a bit lower. So that earlier video of Plug Life Television now comes with the caveat that the vehicle is in regular use and is not a 30 kilowatt hour Nissan Leaf. So yeah, there's been some interesting examples coming out of the woodwork. For longer range vehicles that we have today and generally shorter commutes, my recommendation is charge to about 80% for the majority of time. Typically run it down to at least 50% state of charge before plugging it back in, unless you actually need the range. I run my other EV, between 80 and 20% state of charge, typically. I'll charge it up to 100% if I need the range. I'll charge it below, so I'll drive it below 20% if I need the range. I'll also charge and balance the battery pack to 100%, leave it to do its own thing by charging it fully overnight, about once every month or so, just to calibrate the battery management system and keep all the cells in check as well. But other than that, I would say between 80 and 20% state of charge is your kind of sweet spot. But if it's a shorter range vehicle in constant use, 100% should be okay, provided you drive the car shortly afterwards, like within a few hours.
Great. And I don't know how we're doing for time. How are we doing for time? Move on.
Okay, Paul. Yeah.
I was gonna say the AC/DC thing, and not the song. So please don't burst into song. But just, you know, does DC charging impact the battery more than AC? So the vehicle, well, the battery itself is always going to be charged using DC current, but the difference is, of course, the AC comes from what is basically a glorified power socket. The charger is within the vehicle. It's the vehicle's onboard charger that converts that AC electricity to DC, which then charges the battery. Whereas DC rapid charging, the rapid charger itself is the the converter from
AC to DC. So it's a bit like how your laptop has that brick in the cable that does the conversion to DC that feeds into it, whereas a desktop computer has the power supply built in. So that's, but ultimately it's DC that's powering the battery. So that's an important thing to consider. The rapid charging element is because it's a higher power that's being fed into the battery. You are, of course, going to see a greater amount of heat dissipation. You're going to hit the maximum cell voltages quicker. And it is a slightly less efficient process. And in theory, it should result in increased degradation because of that increased heat. But that said, if you are able to extract that heat immediately afterwards, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. And it's actually, it's unusual to see that much of a difference in degradation between slower charging on AC and rapid charging on DC. In reality, like in the lab, the tests on cells would suggest that rapid charging would impact them, but I've seen plenty of taxis and electric taxis and so on that have been rapid charged pretty constantly and have held up surprisingly well. So I wouldn't necessarily say that rapid charging is that much of a concern in reality, especially if the car has an active thermal management system that's able to deal with things properly. Tesla's particularly good at that with its preheating, deliberately getting the battery hot during charging, then immediately removing that heat afterwards.
Yeah, no, really, really, really useful, because I'm just thinking of James's challenge of always having to charge in the public domain for those that can't charge at home.
Oh yeah, I mean that fleet of VN V200 vans, I mean they have a form of thermal management in them. It's not as good as the likes of the Vivaro E, which I believe is liquid based, but it's good enough to just about do the job, especially on the 24 kilowatt hour versions. And if it was me, I wouldn't be too concerned about rapid charging those vans on a regular basis. Purely from a time perspective, I would say don't really bother rapid charging any car above 80% unless you actually need the range, because by that point, the charging power has started to taper off so much, you'd be as well hopping onto an adjacent destination charge point, AC charge point, and letting someone else on who actually needs to take on a lot of electricity in a very short space of time.
Really useful, thanks.
A quick question, sorry, it's for Euan again, but something that just occurred to me when you were talking, Euan, is the how do I phrase it? The perception of older vehicles. So if James has got a fleet of vehicles leased for 4 or 5 years, he gives them back, and then they go on the second-hand market in whichever form. There's a concern that those batteries are going to be knackered and all of the effort's been used on them. And I know that's not true, but what's the concise way of answering that question to say that's not going to be an issue? How would you address that in a non-technical way so that we can then send that out as a message to others?
Well, yeah, electric vehicles do a much better job of managing their battery packs than the batteries that you get in consumer electronics. So your smartphone and your laptop are inherently very hot machines. The processors run pretty hot. They live in your pocket in the case of smartphones. And, the voltage that the battery is charged to is higher. So that helps to degrade it quicker. And it's basically designed around, almost planned obsolescence in that sense. So it's live fast and die young, whereas electric vehicles, as I said, they have those buffers that block off a bit of capacity, but also preserve the useful lifespan of the cells. There's only a couple of EVs that got that wrong. The 30 kilowatt hour Nissan Leaf is the worst example of that. However, conveniently, it's also the one that shows you its state of health really clearly on the dashboard. So it's patently obvious to anyone who's looking to buy a second-hand Leaf or EN V200 what condition the battery's in. Plus, you've got the Leaf Spy app, which will tell you via OBD anyway. The vast majority of other electric vehicles, battery degradation doesn't seem to have been an issue. I mean, Renault Zoes, for example, which have air-based thermal management systems as opposed to liquid-based, and therefore, in theory, shouldn't be as good as looking after the batteries as some other cars, actually have really long-lived battery packs. Even in hotter climates, there was there's one that's used as a taxi in Turkey that was shared by the Renault Zoe Owners Club in the UK that had, I think it was like 200,000 kilometers, and it was still on like 95% state of health, something like that. It was like properly impressive, especially for a short range older Zoe. So genuinely, these batteries will just run and run. And as for vehicles that do have heavily degraded battery packs, like the 30 kilowatt hour Leaf, if you get unlucky, or the original Japanese built ones, 2011 to 2013, which had an inferior cell chemistry that wasn't heat tolerant at all, those can get batteries swapped out for refurbed or brand new replacements. And there's companies up and down the UK that do that. Cleveland EV's one, the Electron Garage is one. And there's also aftermarket range extending batteries that have been developed for those vehicles too. So actually, I'm going to save myself writing a LinkedIn message. James, with your ENV200s, if you own that fleet outright rather than leasing them, do you actually, or do you lease them?
At least.
Oh, fair enough. Because I was going to say, if they were owned outright, you could extend the lifespan of the asset by sticking in one of these Muxan range extender batteries that have been developed for the ENV200 and the Leaf, which by working in tandem with the original battery pack, mean that neither battery is being worked anywhere near as hard as the original was on its own. So you'll sustain full power rapid charging for longer. You'll have much reduced degradation, a lot less heat dissipation, and you'll also have boosted range as well.
I'll cover your ears for a second, Richard, but I just wanted to highlight that Geotab have a battery degradation tool where they've taken data from 6,000 EVs, all major makes and models. It's quite interesting to see sort of the longevity of the batteries that they tested. I appreciate there's 20 unanswered questions in our chat box. It's been particularly lively today, but we are running out of time. And so what we can do is we're going to copy these questions, and we'll try our best to get them answered for you on our LinkedIn page, where we won't miss anything. I'll ask that all of you can come onto the LinkedIn page and help us with the answers. But yeah, so I'm sorry about that, but we do need to start wrapping things up. I think we can all agree it's been another amazing afternoon. So a big thanks to all the special guests that joined today. So Euan, James, Richard and Kevin, of course, the panelists, the audience, everyone that's joined today. So let's carry on those conversations via social media channels such as LinkedIn page, where we can get those questions answered. You can also visit our YouTube, Twitter, Facebook pages as well. If you want to catch up on any other episodes or have missed anything from today, I need to watch Euan's presentation another 10 more times to fully understand it, then please feel free to visit our YouTube channel under EV Café. And then details of the next one, I think, if I'm right in saying, it's going to be 24th of February for the next session. Details to be announced shortly. But yeah, a final word from me to say a big thanks to everyone today. I think it's been really, really helpful. I've certainly learned a lot. And I'll open the floor for any last words from the rest of the panelists. Thank you. Who wants to go first? John, who's staring me down. Oh, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. Good silence then.
I won't give away my speaking slot this time with a foolish, pointless joke. But I just wanted to say that we've talked a lot about the vehicles themselves. We haven't talked about human error. So it's always worth thinking about your staff and your employees and yourselves when you go on your journeys. Even if they're not long journeys, you can be 10 miles from home and still stranded for 1 or 2 hours. And anything less than 5 degrees is going to be a very miserable existence. So thanks for letting me wear my hat for the entire session, and you've all taken yours off subtly one by one. But I would always recommend hat, gloves, scarf, coat, spare shoes, drinks, and food on board. Even if there was a crash on the motorway, you'd appreciate having those things. So please remember that and go safely.
There we go. We've all got our hats on.
Thank you.
Solidarity, Sarah. So I want to say a big thank you. It's been a tremendous one for me. I love the commercial vehicle piece, of course, and so you hear from James and Kevin, particularly on that, and some real insight from the wonderful Dr. Euan McTurk, and of course, brilliant data, which I think really helps that fleet transition from Webfleet. So do please follow, the like and subscribe bit. Do go onto our page, our LinkedIn page we've got. Do share that with others and encourage people to do it. We will try and answer some of those questions there. And I just want to wish you all positive mental health. And really great posts from JC on our page about that for Blue Monday. Great session. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
I was going to say one last thing, Johnny, and that is one thing we didn't talk on in this show actually about winter driving is driving in winter conditions, and we just need to be cautious of that. And EVs are very torquey; they've got a lot of acceleration, and they can be a handful in winter conditions. So just be careful with that, especially if you're a new new EV driver. You know, it certainly caught me out in the early days. You know, in the winter in Cotswolds in an i3 with big wheels but really thin, and I realised quite quickly that that's quite a dangerous thing to have. So yeah, just be careful and know how that works, how your engines and how your torque is working underneath you, and drive safe.
Thanks, John. You always want to say the last word, don't you?
Well, yes. Really, it's just about people. It's about us looking after each other, because it's real tough at the moment for a lot of people. And I've met some really amazing people through the EV Cafe who I now have proper relationships with, who I've never met. And I think that's wonderful. I keep saying to everybody that I speak to, if you need somebody, I don't know anybody better than my 4 fellow presenters and EV Cafeers, because they are the best. They genuinely give a shit about what they do, about who you are, the journey you're on, and helping. So if you need anything, whether it is about electric vehicles or life is just getting you down a bit, do reach out, do let us know, and we will get back to you, because we care.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you, everybody.
Cheers, everyone.
See you next
Thanks for having
time.
us on. Cheers.
Take care.
Bye.
See ya.
Cheers.